YouTube. This is the Whispering Storyteller, and I'm going to continue with Roald Dahl's classic, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Chapter 12, What It Said on the Golden Ticket. Charlie burst through the front door shouting, "Mother, Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room serving them their evening soup. "Mother," yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look, I've got it. Look, Mother, look. The last golden ticket, it's mine. I found some money in the street, and I bought 2 bars of chocolate, and the second one had the golden ticket, and there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me, and I ran all the way home, and here I am. It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother, and I found it." Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the 4 grandparents, who were sitting in bed, balancing bowls of soup in their laps, all dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke." "I'm not," cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading across his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy, and in the center of each eye, right in the very center, in the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Then the old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside of him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" At the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of the bed with his bowl of soup flying in the face of Grandpa Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, this old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't even been out of bed for the last 20 years, jumped onto the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pajamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie. Hip, hip, hooray!" At this point, the door opened, and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. It was cold, and he was very tired, and he looked it. All day, he'd been shoveling snow in the streets. "Cripes," he cried. "What is going on here?" It didn't take them very long at all to tell him what happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not possible." "Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pajamas. "Show your father the 5th and last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with a precious document. It was a very beautiful thing, this golden ticket, having been made, so it seemed, from a sheet of pure gold hammered out almost to the thinnest of papers. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself from Willy Wonka. "Read it aloud, loud, said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed at last. Let's all hear exactly what it says. Mr. Bucket held the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly. He seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths and then cleared his throat and said, "All right, I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, lucky finder of this golden ticket from Mr. Willy Wonka. I share you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for the whole day. You and all others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything that here to see, and afterwards, when it's time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you for the entire household for many, many years. If at any time thereafter you should run out of supplies, you only have to come back to the factory and show this golden ticket, and I will be very happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises that are even more marvelous and more fantastic that you, and for all of my beloved golden ticket holders, mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond your wildest dreams. You could not imagine that such beautiful things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for the visit is the first day in the month of February. On this day, and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late, and you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you, and ensure that you don't get up to mischief. Oh, one more thing, be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. The first day of February, cried Mrs. Bucket. Why, that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. Cripes, said Mr. Bucket. I think you're right. You're just in time, shouted Grandpa Joe. There's not a moment to lose. You must start making preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get all that mud off your pants. You must really get ready, my boy. You must really get ready for the biggest day of your life. Now don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa, Mrs. Bucket said. And don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all keep very calm. Now the first thing to decide is this. Who is going to go with Charlie to the factory? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of bed once again. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man, and then she turned to her husband and said, How about you, dear? Don't you think Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it. No, I'm not sure that I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It would be tremendously exciting, but on the other hand, I believe that person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe himself. He seems to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, he feels well enough. Yippee, shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room. He certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one that goes with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave 3 other old people all alone in bed for a whole day. Hallelujah, cried Grandpa Joe. Praise the Lord. On that point, there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment, swarms of newspapermen and photographers were pouring into the house. They tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front pages of the morning papers. For several hours, there was complete pandemonium in the little house. It must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow, and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Willy Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people were gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, in a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children, together or with the grown-ups who had come with them. The tall, bony figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly amongst them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All of the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them, and that was a good thing they had, otherwise the whole party might have got out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back. Be patient, cried the fathers. Be still. It's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind him, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the street as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. There's Viola Bogarty, he heard somebody shout. That's her, all right. I remember her face from the newspapers. And you know what? Somebody else shouted. She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for 3 months. You look at her jaws and how they're still working on it. Who's the fat boy? That's Augustus Gloop. So it is. Enormous, isn't he? Fantastic. Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled to his wind cheater? Oh, that's Mike TV. He's the television fiend. He must be crazy. Look at all those toy pistols he's got hanging all over him. The one I want to see is Veruca Salt, shouted another voice in the crowd. She's the girl whose father brought up 500,000 chocolate bars and had all the workers in his peanut factory unwrap every one of them until they found a golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it and she gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? a mink coat. Which one is Charlie Bucket? Charlie Bucket? He must be the skinny little shrimp beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton. Very close to us, just there. See him? Why hasn't he got a coat on in this weather? Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford to buy one. Goodness me, he must be freezing. Charlie, standing only a few spaces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began striking 10. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became silent. The children stopped jumping